Well, welcome one and all. Welcome to everyone who's joining us on Facebook. This is a brief promo video so you can get a snapshot of Eye of the Storm, comment être productif et heureux, efficace et heureux comme traducteur, workshop from Magistrade. We are going to be talking about decision fatigue and some energy issues we have as translators and see if we can boost our energy levels and become a little bit more effective. So this is going to be a roughly 15-minute video to give you kind of a teaser of the things you learn in Eye of the Storm. So we've been talking about decision fatigue and the fact that knowledge workers have a lot of decision fatigue since we have to make many decisions every day. And before I even go on to the next point, would anyone like to venture how many decisions a human being makes on an average day? Take a wild guess. No takers? So on average, about 35,000 decisions. That's what the literature suggests. And you can be sure that in translation, we make quite a few more. We are constantly making complex decisions that involve a whole range of factors. This is part of what makes translation so taxing for your mind. So we have to think about the suitability of the language we're using, the context it fits into, the tone, also the end reader, who's going to read the text and why. And there are many other variables like mechanics and grammar and all those things, of course. So there are many different things to look out for when you're translating. That's part of what makes it so challenging. Thankfully, specialists have looked into decision fatigue and how to overcome it, how to make your brain more effective, how to recover from making a lot of tough decisions. And essentially one of the best tips I can give you is to try to make fewer decisions outside of work. So you can read this quote from Barack Obama: "I'm trying to pare down decisions. I don't want to make decisions about what I'm eating or wearing because I have too many other decisions to make." So this is a really quick, easy tip. Try to pick out your clothes the night before and see how that works for you. I find it's a great start to the day if I've already chosen what I'm going to be wearing. And if you set up routines in your life, then you can really reduce some of that decision fatigue. I'm just going to jump back here a second, something I wanted to point out. Here we have Judge Judy, and I believe there's a Quebec equivalent. I don't remember her name. But anyway, you get the idea, these kind of TV judges. Take a guess at whether judges deny more parole requests in the morning or the afternoon. Go ahead, jump right in.
I'd say definitely afternoon.
Definitely afternoon, you'd be right. So judges are harsher in the afternoon when they're more tired. So this is something to keep in mind. People in all different fields have a harder time of it in the afternoon. It's not just biology, it's not your circadian rhythms. It's because you get tired from making decisions all day long. So we as translators have to be really careful. And decision making can be thought of as a muscle, gets depleted over the course of the day, and you have to find ways to recover. Oh, and Anne-France Goldwater, right? The name of the judge. Thank you. So we've talked about one easy, quick tip, which is to pick out your clothes the day before. Just step back here, getting ahead of myself. You can also think about meal planning. It might be tough to stick to a meal plan, but my goodness, I find that if we don't do any meal planning at all, that really takes a toll. And often I'm texting back and forth with my spouse near the end of the day, and then I'm having a hard time translating because I'm thinking about whether we have everything we need to make tacos. So I recommend that you consider getting a grid and doing a little bit of meal planning, or at least having a regular structure. For example, at lunch, you text back and forth with your spouse and decide what you're doing for dinner. Quick and easy solution that will kind of help you have a little bit more mental real estate available for your translation work. Same thing with your food shopping. If you have like a ritual or a day that you regularly go food shopping, you try to avoid food shopping, of course, when you're tired, because you're going to make poor decisions. I'm not teaching you anything you don't know, but it's a good reminder. If you can simplify your literal and figurative desktop, we talked about how if you have a lot of distracting things around in your environment, it's sometimes a little bit more difficult to concentrate and make decisions because those things are pulling at your attention. So if you can have a nice clean office and a cleaned up desk, cleaned up desktop on your computer, you might find that helps to make you a little bit more effective too. I certainly find that when things are cleaned up, I'm in a better mood to work and I tend to be a little bit more focused. So Francis is asking a question, says, did you say routine was good or bad. So routine is really good. If you can build in routine into your day and have a structure laid out, then that way you don't have to think about what you need to be doing. You know, and it can be really simple things. I'll give you one example. I used to have all these different winter socks. You know, some were gray, some were black. They were all from different materials. Some were cotton, some were polyester. And I would, you know, they always disappeared in the wash. I'd always lose a few. And I don't know, I remember a professor who said there's a gnome that lives in every dryer that will take your sock away. Anyway, one day I decided to fix the problem once and for all. And when I saw there was a sale on winter socks at a store, I just went there and bought out a huge section of their men's winter socks, and they're all the same. So now I have enough socks for about 5 years. And in the morning, I never have to think about what socks I'm putting on anymore. So problem solved. Very easy, quick tip, and it might sound silly, but if you can identify those little things in your daily life that pull at your attention and they're just one more thing, and sometimes that little thing is the straw that broke the camel's back. So if you can simplify your decision making in your daily life, you'll be surprised at how that frees up your brain for translation. Another thing you might program into your day, for example, is going for a slow walk after lunch. What a wonderful daily routine that you can get into. You don't have to think about what you're going to do after lunch. You know every day what's coming up. And slow walking is a great way to restore your concentration and to feel wonderful. So in Tai Chi, they recommend slow walking as a great way to heal your body and your mind. Other quick tips, and you're probably familiar with this idea, make your most important decisions early in the day. That one's pretty obvious. So if you're a translator, most people are most fresh in the morning. So you want to think about putting your tough translation problems early in the day. I've recommended a checklist for your specific translation routine. So for example, when I plan to do a translation or to do some editing on a text, I don't just write in my planner, revised text, for example. I'll say, do one pass of this text to work on meaning specifically, or to work on flow, or to work on mechanics. So in other words, I have a specific sequence of steps I go through to ensure the quality of each translation I do. So that takes away from my decision-making fatigue, because I have a specific routine for my translation. I have a routine for my editing process. So we won't go back over that. That's something you get in the full course, but having some kind of a checklist and establishing the steps you go through in your translation or editing process is a great way to free up your mind. So we've talked about the example of translation. There's a wonderful book about this, by the way, if you're interested. It's called the Checklist Manifesto. And it talks about how many professions use checklists very effectively. And the best example he gives is airline pilots who have to use a checklist. And the fact that airline pilots make so few decisions, statistically speaking, compared to other professionals, specifically because they're held to a checklist. They have to go through a specific sequence. They can't just improvise when they go to work. So I recommend the same thing in translation, coming up with your own sequence and following it. We have to keep in mind too that we make mistakes due to being overly familiar with text once we've read them a few times. And you have to keep in mind too that in many professions, people have many kind of facets of what they do. If you think about a pharmaceutical rep, they might have to do some paperwork and then meet with a doctor and then attend a meeting. And they have all these different kinds of activities they do at work. Whereas in translation, we're fairly limited. We're translating and editing text and then maybe writing email. But there's a lot of repetition, a lot of repetitious work in what we do. So that's something that takes a toll as well. We get pattern recognition blindness. We kind of, once we've seen a text, we don't see it anymore. We don't see the forest for the trees, or vice versa. We also tend to read what we want to read on the page rather than what's actually there. Very, very, very problematic in our particular field. And of course, we get mentally exhausted, I think in large part because of decision fatigue. It takes quite a toll. Just have to think about so many different layers when you're translating a text, from the author's intent to the end user and everything in between, the language mechanics and so on. There are solutions to these problems, and I'm going to share a few with you now. One is to try to use different physical senses to approach your task. So for example, rather than reading a text for the 4th or 5th or 6th time, Why not have it read back to you by Dragon Naturally Speaking? The voice is wonderful. It sounds very smooth overall. And I like to just walk around and take notes as I'm listening, and then I'll come back and rework the text in all the areas where I heard redundancy or anything that didn't work very well or that was choppy, or I heard a mistake somewhere or a word was missing, things that can easily go unnoticed on the screen because we're so used to that medium. So using that readback function is absolutely fabulous. I'm also a big proponent of staring off into space. So while you work, take some time, don't translate nonstop. Take some time to look out your window, perhaps look at a painting, whatever it might be, but take some time to unfocus your eyes and let yourself reflect on what you're translating, reflect on what the author's trying to say before jumping into drafting. So that time is well spent, I find, sort of a more generalized attention than focusing intently on the words on the screen. Is there anyone here who uses that technique, staring off into space? Yeah? Is there anything in particular that you look at, or do you look out the window, or?
I got into the habit of going to a cafe to work, partly because I can sit and stand there, and also I have people around me, which is not the case when I'm at home. And I tend to stare either out the window or just in the space in the cafe, or the paintings and the art that's out there. It's not inspiring, but it helps me clear my mind and find words that I want to use.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I think those are really, really good habits. And I'm a big fan of working in a cafe, at least from time to time. It's a great way to just get a different feel for your text, read it in a different environment physically. Absolutely. We have a question from Fanny. Okay, you also asked anyone else having issues reading for pleasure in their mother tongue because they're too used to proofreading and analyzing texts. Oh, that's a good question. Does anyone have an answer to that? So having trouble reading for fun, is it because you start to examine or you start to overanalyze the text you're reading?
I proofread, I spell check, and I'm not even paying attention to what I'm reading. I'm just looking at the words and doing what I usually do with my translations. Mm-hmm. So yeah, so easier for me to read in English than it is in French. It's less exhausting.
Interesting, interesting. I guess you have that mental association built up, which certainly makes sense. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I guess
someone else.
Sure, someone else want to pitch in?
Well, Michelle said in the chat that it happens to her
same
too.
problem. Okay. Yeah, I think once again, that's where I find that Audible or a similar service is fantastic because it gets your eye off the page. So you can go about your chores or go about taking a walk and listen to a book. I find it's incredibly enjoyable as a translator, and I enjoy listening for fun. Just be aware that if you're going to read a book on paper, you're probably going to read a lot faster. If you listen to a book, often, a good novel will be like 11 or 12 hours long. So it's a bit longer. You have to be a bit more patient, but it's also incredibly enjoyable. I find that can help with kind of overanalyzing. I find I get very critical of text too. If I see there's a comma missing somewhere, my brow will furrow and I'll get very critical really quickly. So I guess that's just part of, it comes with the job, I suppose. One tip I'll give you to get a different feel for your text also, at some point in the editing process, I recommend that you blow up your text. So really zoom in on your Word document. It'll get you reading in a different way. You'll be looking at kind of micro elements of the text. And conversely, if you want to get a big picture look at your text and read for meaning, I find it more helpful to zoom out a bit further than usual. So make your document a little bit smaller. There's something about seeing all those paragraphs. You really can reconstruct the meaning. So physically zooming in and zooming out, depending on whether you've decided to do a pass for micro things, mechanics, punctuation, prepositions, things like that, or macro elements such as the context, suitability for the end user, meaning, all those kinds of things. So at some point with every text, I do recommend that you try at least blowing it up so that you can really zoom in on those little details, literally. We've talked about reading in a different location. Cafes are fantastic. Even sometimes just going to your dining room, there's something about working in a different location that gets you thinking in different directions often. And I do recommend that too. Did someone have a question? I heard someone chiming in.
No, in another course, I think it was from Magistrat too, someone advised to try reading backwards, not backwards each word, but go sentence by sentence, starting from your last sentence. Then it flips your perception of the text a little bit easier, because you forget where you came from and you're working your way backwards and you see it differently.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing that. The variation I've heard most often is to read backwards in paragraphs. Usually in paragraphs, because that way it's a large enough unit of meaning that you can figure out whether things flow together as opposed to one sentence at a time. But yes, absolutely, reading backwards is another way to get a fresh point of view. There are also more and more tablets coming out that are the size of a sheet of paper, and you can actually read a text and make notes directly in the document and sync with your computer. So right now, I know there's one called a Remarkable tablet. They're relatively pricey, but I imagine they're going to get much less expensive with time. So definitely keep an eye out. I think some technologies will end up being helpful in that respect. And we have a comment from Jamie: staring off into space. I moved my desk to face into the room rather than against a blank wall. Oh, interesting. Much easier on the eyes. I also placed my task whiteboard across the room, so I have to get up and walk over to it to make changes and update my to-do list. Wow, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. I'm taking notes because that's not something that I do. I think it's a really great idea. Wonderful idea. Anything that can get you to physically stand up and go and move a little bit. Hand in hand with that, one thing you might consider, I've actually tracked back from having a digital clock, and I have a physical old school clock in my office. So when I want to see what time it is, I don't look at my monitor, I look off into the distance at my clock, which is about 10 feet away. So sometimes using those old school technologies can be a great way to get you at least looking somewhere else than your screen, and in Jamie's case, getting up and moving. That's really great. All those little things count. If you're an interpreter, it's a good idea to read texts to get a different sense of them. And for translators, again, I recommend listening, so you can use Dragon. Dragon really provides the best quality readback you're going to find on the market. That said, you know, it is rather expensive if that's all you're going to use it for, but I'm a big proponent of dictating your translations. It tends to make them considerably more natural. So I personally do recommend at least trying dictation and seeing if it works for you. I find that the rough draft tends to be better overall. All right. You can also, of course, juggle your tasks. It's a good idea to get your mind off of one text when you work on another and then come back to the other one. So there's of course a balance to be found. Another good tip I would give you has to do with sleep. And it turns out they've done experiments with rats in mazes, kind of classic experiments, and they found that if you put a rat in a maze and have it run a maze once or just a few times, the brain will not change that much. But if you have the rat run in that maze and then get a good night of sleep, the next day, the rat will be considerably better at finding its way through the maze. And subsequent experiments have found that basically mammal brains improve from sleep. Our memory, our information recall, our skill improves based on our quality of sleep. And that's no huge surprise. We all know that when we get a good night of sleep, we function better. But I think it's helpful in translation, because if you work hard on that first draft on one day and then you sleep on it and you come back to it with a fresh pair of eyes the next day, it's not just that your eyes are rested, your brain is actually going to be more rested as well, and you'll tend to come up with great solutions. Things you probably didn't think the day before, because your brain will keep mulling on that text while you sleep and will help you find solutions. So I don't know if you've experienced this before, but I love the sequence of doing a rough draft and then coming back to it first thing in the morning, and often I'll think of all kinds of inspired expressions where before, you know, I came up with a very dry and very basic translation that was closer to the French. I do recommend that. Of course, there are a lot of tips I could give you in terms of getting a great night of sleep, but I think those tips we pretty much know those tips. You know, turning off screens an hour before bedtime, drinking some tea is good for you, a bath, take a bath with magnesium, it's even better. Anything that calms down your nervous system before sleep will help significantly. But basically, you just have to decide that, you know, sleep is a priority, and you resolve to get a great night of sleep. What we don't want, of course, is to burn the candle at both ends and to get exhausted. So a good night of sleep is essential. And as we've talked about, Making sure to have specific times in your day when you turn off your cell phone or you leave it out of sight. That will also help your brain to recover so you can function well as a translator. We're going to start the next section, and this will be the final part in the Facebook Live. We're going to talk about physical and mental well-being. And start by talking about physical inactivity. So we as translators work at the desk most of the time. And a few years ago, I don't know if you heard about this, there are all kinds of articles about how sitting is the new smoking. And it's true, sitting for long stretches of time is really bad for you. So whether you work at home or at an office, it's really important to get around and move around on a regular basis. If you work for a long time in front of your screen, you're going to tend to get eye strain issues. So I'm going to give you some techniques to deal with that later on. You can also get really stiff. So it's important to do some kind of stretching. So you can do some kind of stretching or swimming, something that will get the kinks out. That's a great way to feel better and be more effective. I personally do Qigong. If you do yoga or Tai Chi, anything along those lines will be fantastic and your brain will function better during your day of work, I guarantee it. So, did you know your brain requires about 3 times as much oxygen as the rest of your body? Your brain requires about 3 times as much oxygen. So when someone tells you you should take a walk to oxygenate your brain, that's quite true physically and literally. You do need oxygen. So be sure to open your windows from time to time, and better yet, get out and take a quick walk. It's very important for your brain to function properly. Vitamin O. If you can program some kind of an exercise routine in your day, that's really ideal. If you can say, for example, I go for a quick run in the morning. I know some people who work in an office and they go for a quick run or a power walk right after lunch or right before lunch. Sometimes there are ways, if you're creative enough, you can find solutions in terms of getting that physical activity in, but having some kind of a routine will help you manage your day better, making it something predictable. Of course, anything along these lines is great. You do team sports, yoga, martial arts, calisthenics. Push-ups I find are really fantastic. I'm a big fan of push-ups. Some people find them boring. I find that they're always a good challenge and really get me pumped up and in a good mood to translate. So is there any exercise that you do during your day of work that helps you to function well as a translator or to cope with all the work on screen? Nothing you'd like to share in particular? Okay, well, feel free to chat about it if you'd like to. Otherwise, I'll keep moving on. In general, the recommendation is 150 minutes a week of moderate exercise, 75 minutes a week of intense exercise. There's a much easier recipe. Just consider you need to get about 20 minutes of moderate to intense activity every day. I find that's an easier way to remember it. About 20 minutes of moderate to intense physical activity. If you go to work, then consider parking further away from where you work. It's a small thing, but it will add up over time. Take the stairs rather than the elevator, and consider going for a quick jog at lunch. Melody is sharing, move your DNA from Katie Bowman. Oh, how interesting, I'm not familiar. Move your DNA. Melody, would you mind sharing maybe one takeaway from the book? If you're comfortable, if not, no big deal. Okay, we'll come back to Melody. Of course, it's hard to take a break because when you have deadlines all day long, you feel like if you kind of go, you'll get through your day, and that's the only way you'll ever get everything done, right? But in a way, it's a fallacy because if you take that time to rest, you will be more productive. And as we saw earlier, when your fuel is adrenaline, and you're very adrenaline driven, you tend to make poorer decisions. So it's not really great as a translator for you to be stressed out during your day. It's much more effective to take short breaks and to feel good throughout your day. You'll make better decisions and you'll be more productive. Jamie's mentioning a posture reset exercise. So I imagine that's some way to make sure you're sitting up straight.
Yeah, sure. You can just simply put your hands behind your neck and just stretch back.
Hands behind your back and just stretch back. I like that.
Behind your neck. Yeah. And it stretches out your neck, your traps, because we're so inclined to just be slouching forward, it also opens up your chest. And it helps, and if you take a few deep breaths too, it can help your brain, as you were saying.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that. I know there's another classic desk exercise where you kind of stretch up into the side and breathe in, and do the same on the other side. Because that's one thing that happens over the course of the day. You kind of hunch over and you don't breathe properly. So you're not breathing in enough air to feel good and function very well. Someone's mentioning hanging off of my pull-up bar to create space in my spine. Wow, fantastic. Having a pull-up bar. Excellent idea. Excellent. When we do this live, I have everyone get up and do a little bit of stretching exercises. We just did a couple at the desk. I think we'll leave it at that because it's a little bit trickier doing it on video, but there's a lot of there are a lot of great exercises you can do. I like 7 minutes of magic, which is a free Qigong routine you can find on YouTube. I'm a big fan of the instructor and all his YouTube videos that are all free. And I liked it so much, I got his book, which is also called 7 Minutes of Magic, and has a lot of easy stretches, but they really hit all the right spots to make you feel like $1,000,000. I really recommend 7 Minutes of Magic. And there are any number of exercises, of apps you can find on the Chrome store and elsewhere. Another favorite of mine, if you're a little bit more intrepid, is called Darebee, D-A-R-E-B-E-E, Darebee. And the idea is it gives you all kinds of exercise routines for all different moods you might be in. So there's some that are kind of kickboxing inspired, and others are very gentle stretching routines, but they're all very, very easy. And you can print them out and put them in a notebook. And whenever you feel that you need a certain kind of routine, you need more stretching or need something more active, you can flip open your notebook or simply go on the app and find a great routine. And they're explained really well. So I find that's kind of the problem sometimes with the workout apps. Sometimes they don't explain the exercises very well, or it isn't clear. I'm not sure if I'm doing it right. But Darebee I find is really exceptional. The pictures are very, very clear, very easy to follow. As far as eye strain, making sure you follow the 20-20-20 rule. So every 20 minutes, look 20 feet away for 20 seconds. This is a standard recommendation for anyone working in front of a computer monitor. If you're still having a little bit of eye fatigue, and that's certainly been the case for me, you might consider anti-fatigue glasses. Basically, what they do is make sure that your eyes are ideally focused 3 feet away. So I have a separate pair of glasses. This is my pair of glasses when I'm working at my office. So I'm in front of my monitor, and I have a separate pair of glasses that I switch out when I'm done my day. So for evenings and weekends. And basically the anti-fatigue will help you focus your eyes 3 feet away. So very, very easy on the eyes, very, very enjoyable. You can also get a blue filter on your glasses. Of course, I'm sure many of you already have that, something well known, but you can filter out the blue light that is known to be harmful to your eyes. That's another thing you could consider when you go and get your eyes checked. Of course, you can eliminate screens before and after work. Your eyes will thank you as well. Do you know any good headache cures? Any good headache cures? No? If you're prone to headaches, they actually recommend using a warm compress on your eyes and lying down for about 10 to 20 minutes. The warmth helps to relax all the muscles around your eyes. I find that cold also helps too. You put like a cold rag or something on your eyes for a few minutes. It's a huge help. And sometimes when I take my nap at midday, I'll put a rag, like a warm or cold compress on my eyes. And in the afternoon, I feel like I just woke up. My eyes are completely relaxed and feel great. So you might consider that as well. Alrighty, and I think we've reached the 15-minute mark. So I want to thank everyone who's joined us from Facebook. I hope this has been helpful and you've gotten at least a few takeaways. And the rest of us will keep going with the remainder of the seminar. So again, if you joined us from Facebook, have a wonderful day. I hope this has been helpful.